of spring in Moscow. On that distant May Day back in 1920, Vladimir Lenin participated in laying the cornerstone in Moscow's Theater Square for a monument to the great thinker and revolutionary Karl Marx. Lenin said that on this day of the International Holiday of Labor, when we want to prove to everyone that we will be able to resolve the task of organizing a socialist society of working people, we are paying tribute to the memory of Karl Marx. Marx was convinced that the peoples of Russia would wipe out Tsarist despotism and would inevitably build a Russian commune. The Great October Socialist Revolution of 1917 created a socialist society devoid of exploitation. The party of Bolsheviks, headed by Lenin, and the working masses of Russia, for the first time in the world, translated the dream of Marx into reality. Karl Marx, scholar, revolutionary, man. The narrator, candidate of philosophy, Vasily Kuznetsov.
Детство и юность Карла Маркса.
The childhood and youthhood of Karl Marx passed in Prussia during the first half of the last century. Political persecution compelled him to move from city to city, from country to country. Marx left his native land and arrived in Paris. After being banished from France, Marx lives in Brussels, and only the revolutionary events in Europe in 1848 enabled him to return to Germany. However, after the reactionaries triumphed and the revolution was crushed, he was compelled to leave his native land. Marx found asylum in England. It was here in London that he lived the greater part of his life, a life that was not easy, but was productive, full of work and great accomplishments. London today is a far cry from the London of the middle of the last century. The narrow streets today are full of automobiles. The skyline of London has also changed. In the mid-60s of the last century, a very popular game in London was Confessions. The participants in this game were to truthfully relate their inclinations and features of character. This game was also played in the family of the political emigrant Karl Marx. At times, Marx's replies seemed to be a confession of a fearless revolutionary. Your distinguishing feature, unity of purpose. Your understanding of happiness, to struggle. Your favorite color, red. Thinker. Vladimir Lenin considered Capital the main and fundamental work of Marx, outlining scientific socialism. It was the fruit of 4 decades of titanic work, crowned with brilliant discoveries. A letter to the German socialist Siegfried Meyer. Why did not I answer you? Because all this time I was on the edge of the grave. That is why I had to make use of every moment when I was capable of working to complete my composition, for which I have sacrificed my health, the happiness of life, and my family. If you want to be a beast, of course, one can turn one's back on the sufferings of mankind and look after your own hide. But I would consider myself truly impractical if I died without having finished my book, at least in manuscript. He worked on his book, Capital, in extremely difficult conditions. All the burdens of banishment and severe material deprivations came tumbling down on Marx. His true friend and associate came to his aid. Here in Manchester, Friedrich Engels had been working for 20 years as a clerk at his father's factory, and he provided material aid to Marx and his family. Lenin wrote that if it were not for the regular and self-sacrificing support of Engels, Marx would not only have been unable to finish Capital, but would have surely perished from poverty. In order to cope with this gigantic task, Marx had to exert superhuman efforts. In respect to himself, he applied what he called a system of shifts. During the day, he worked in the reading room of the British Museum. At night, he wrote his book. The scope of Marx's titanic work can be seen from the following fact. Capital consists of 4 volumes, 7 thick books. On August 16, 1867, the last 49th quire, the first volume of Capital, was signed for printing. At 2 o'clock at night, Marx writes to Engels in Manchester. Dear Fred, and so the last volume is ready. I am indebted only to you that this became possible. Without your self-sacrificing for my sake, I would not at all have been able to do this tremendous work on 3 volumes. I embrace you, full of gratitude. Greetings, my dear, true friend. Unlike the utopians before him, Marx approached the question concerning prospects for the development of society as a scholar. We are not striving to dogmatically anticipate the future, but desire, through criticizing the old world, to find a new world. In Capital, the anatomy of the capitalist society was for the first time subjected to a detailed and in-depth scientific analysis. What is the source of that teaching which was fully embodied in the great work of Marx, Capital?
Karl
Marx was born on May the 5th, 1818, in the city of Trier, Rhine province of Prussia. At that time, it was the most advanced part of Germany in economic, political, and cultural aspects. Marx's father, a justice counselor, Heinrich Marx, was a highly educated person, knowledgeable in classical literature, and an adherent to the progressive ideas of the French Enlighteners. At grammar school, Karl's favorite teachers were Wittenbach, who taught history and philosophy, and Steininger, a teacher of mathematics and physics, noted for their progressive views. In a composition at grammar school, 17-year-old Marx comes to the conclusion that the real meaning of life and the calling on each of every person is to serve people, to work for the well-being of humankind. Marx started majoring in law at Bonn University. A year later, he transferred to the university in Berlin. This is Berlin in our days. Karl Marx Allee. Unter den Linden. Berlin University. One of the homes where Marx rented a room has been preserved. As a student, Marx lived an intensive spiritual life. He wrote to his father, "Upon my arrival in Berlin, I gave up all my previous acquaintanceships. I had to study law, and first of all, I felt a desire to try myself in philosophy. It became clear to me that without philosophy, I would not be able to advance." Marx began studying the works of the representatives of classical German philosophy, Kant, Fichte, Hegel. Although he did not share Hegel's reactionary political conclusions, he accepted his dialectical method. Marx became close with the members of the left wing of Hegel's school, and thanks to his strong willpower, ardent spirit, and lofty culture, already at the age of 19, he won prestige among them. From a letter by German writer Moses Hess to writer Berthold Auerbach. Be prepared to meet the greatest and perhaps the only real philosopher living today. He is a combination of profound philosophical seriousness and refined wit. Imagine for yourself that Rousseau, Voltaire, Goldbach, Lessing, Heine, and Hegel are combined in one person, and you have before you Dr. Marx. From Hegel's dialectics, the young Hegelians drew radical conclusions and sharply criticized religious dogmas. From criticism of religion, they went over to criticism of politics. Jena University conferred upon Marx the scientific degree of Doctor of Philosophy. In his dissertation, he proclaimed the principle of the active attitude of philosophy toward life. Marx's acquaintance with the works of Ludwig Feuerbach accelerated his transition to positions of materialism. However, Marx's critical view also spotted the weak points in the teaching of that German philosopher. Unlike Feuerbach, who explained only natural phenomena from the materialistic point of view, Marx set out to create an integral world outlook, embracing both nature and society. Marx intended to teach philosophy at Bonn University. However, the stepped-up reprisals by the Prussian government prevented him from doing so. Marx moved to Cologne. Today, it is difficult to imagine Cologne at the time of Marx's youthhood. Practically nothing has remained from the city of those days. The famous cathedral, whose construction was started back in the 14th century, was in those years still being built. And these buildings too did not exist then. In Cologne, Marx began working in the liberal Rheinische Zeitung. Soon he became editor of the newspaper, which transformed into a revolutionary democratic paper. As editor of the Rheinische Zeitung, for the first time I had to write about so-called material interests. That gave the first impetus for my study of economic questions. Marx came out as defender of the interests of the rightless, poverty-stricken people of labor. Working on the newspaper enabled Marx to unfold and crystallize his features as a political fighter, a fearless man with a critical mind, a talented organizer and publicist. Fearing the mounting influence of the Rheinische Zeitung, the Prussian government tightened up censorship. Marx writes to the German publicist and philosopher Arnold Ruge. I have begun to suffocate in this atmosphere. It's disgusting to act with pinpricks instead of fighting with clubs. I'm fed up with hypocrisy, stupidity, blatant arbitrariness. I'm fed up with time-serving, dodging, submission, and reckoning with every petty quibble. Marx left the editorial board. However, this did not save the newspaper and was closed down. In Kreuznach, Karl Marx married his childhood friend, Jenny von Westphalen, whom he was engaged to before his departure to Berlin University. Karl and Jenny leave Prussia and settle down in Paris. Just like other cities in Europe, in a century and a half, Paris has changed beyond recognition. But even then, just as today, there were bookstalls on the Seine embankment near the Notre Dame Cathedral. Here in Paris, Marx, together with Arnold Ruge, published the German-French yearbook. In Paris, Marx attentively studied various trends in utopian socialism and communism. The utopians accurately pointed to the vices of the bourgeois society, yet they were unable to show the proletariat the way to emancipation. Marx visited workers' clubs. Even then, he came to the brilliant conclusion about the role of revolutionary teaching. Theory becomes a revolutionary force as soon as it wins over the masses. In the articles published in the German-French yearbook, Marx completed his transition from idealism to materialism and from revolutionary democratism to communism. Engels recalls, when in the summer of 1844 I visited Marx in Paris, it became clear that we saw eye to eye in all theoretical fields, and from that moment on, our joint work began. That meeting marked the beginning of a great concord. In Paris, they wrote their first joint work, The Holy Family. But soon, on the insistence of the Prussian government, Marx was banished from Paris for his revolutionary activity. Jenny Marx, a police commissioner, came to us and presented an order declaring that Karl Marx was to leave Paris within 24 hours. Marx and his family found shelter in Brussels. Grand Place, in the center of Brussels. Here in the hotel at the Swan, Marx and Engels met their associates revolutionaries. Engels. When we met again in Brussels in the spring of 1845, Marx had completed the main outlines of developing his materialistic theory of history, and we began to work in detail on these new outlooks in the most diverse directions. That spring, Marx wrote Theses on Feuerbach. Engels described them as the first document containing the congenial embryo of a new world outlook. The 11th thesis is a revolutionary proclamation. Philosophers only explain the world in different ways, but the matter is how to change it. In their joint work, German Ideology, Marx and Engels formulated the basic principles of the New World Outlook. Having applied materialistic dialectics to comprehending society, they demonstrated that its existence and development were based on material production. Engels described the materialistic understanding of history as the first great discovery made by Marx. From this, the conclusion was drawn for the need for a communist transformation of society. However, at that time, it was not possible to publish the book. Not a single publisher undertook to do it. We were all the more eager to present the manuscript to the gnawing criticism of rodents, that our main goal, understanding the matter ourselves, had been attained. The next significant book by Marx was The Poverty of Philosophy. This book contained the embryo of that which, after 20 years of labor, transformed into the theory developed in Capital. Already at the end of the 1850s, while living in London, in the course of his economic studies, Marx discovered the internal law which governed the development of capitalist society. The theory of surplus value became the nucleus of Marxist political economy. And Marx developed this theory in Capital, where he scientifically proved that capitalism would inevitably perish. Engels. Ever since capitalists and workers have existed on Earth, there has never been a single book which had such a significance for the workers. Without a doubt, this is the most terrible bullet that has been fired at the head of the bourgeoisie. The first translation of Capital into a foreign language was its Russian edition. The book was translated by Marx's friend, revolutionary German Lopatin, and the economist publicist Nikolai Danielson. The ideas of Capital became widespread in Russia. Marx noted that Capital was read in Russia more than anywhere else. Soon the Tsarist secret police entered it in the blacklist of banned books. Capital is the main work of Marxism. It represents the greatest scientific exploit of Marx. Engels. Marx stood higher, saw further, viewed more and faster than all of us. Marx was a genius. Without him, our theory would not be where it is now. And that is why it rightfully bears his name. To struggle was his element.
Гениальный ученый,
A congenial scholar and revolutionary, such was Marx.
необычайно ярка.
He was an unusually striking personality, and one can only arbitrarily draw a line between scholar and revolutionary.
Наука давала прочную основу
Science offered a firm foundation for revolutionary practice. Revolutionary passion ignited scientific thought. Marx was one of the founders and leaders of the first international organization of the working class. In January of 1847, the London Committee of the Communist Organization, the League of the Just, addressed Marx and Engels with a proposal for them to join the League, to participate in its reorganization, and to draw up a program on the basis of their new revolutionary theory, and they gave their consent. The first Congress of the League was held in London in June of the same year. The delegate from the Paris Commune was Engels. At the Congress, the League of the Just was transformed into the Communist League. On a proposal of Marx and Engels, the former motto, "All people are brothers," was changed for the passionate appeal, "Working men of all countries, unite." The first paragraph of the Communist League Charter declared that the goal of the League was to overthrow the bourgeoisie, to establish rule by the proletariat, to destroy the old bourgeois society based on antagonism of classes, and to build a new society without classes and without private property. London, the Red Lion Hotel. It was here that the Second Congress of the Communist League was held in November of 1847. In the heated discussions, Marx and Engels upheld the principles of scientific communism, which triumphed completely at the Congress. A member of the League, worker Friedrich Lessner. Marx was a natural-born leader of the people. His speech was brief, coherent, inexorably logical. He never spoke uselessly. Each phrase was a thought in itself. Each phrase was a necessary link in a chain of arguments. Marx and Engels were entrusted to draw up the wording of the Communist Manifesto. In the Communist Manifesto, they presented a brief, integral exposition of the fundamentals of their teaching. Noting the historical significance of the manifesto, Lenin said that this small pamphlet was worth whole volumes. The principles set down in the manifesto about the historical mission of the proletariat resound with the force of irrefutable scientific logic. The bourgeoisie not only forged the weapon that carried death to it, it also bore the people who would direct that weapon against it, the contemporary workers, the proletarians. For the first time, the objectives and tasks of the communist movement were openly proclaimed in that work. The communists disdained to conceal their views and aims. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries, unite. The manifesto came off the press on the eve of the revolution in Europe. On February 24th, 1848, the people of Paris rose up and overthrew the monarchy of Louis-Philippe. France became a republic. A member of the provisional government of the French Republic, Ferdinand Flocon, invites Marx to return to Paris. Courageous and honest Marx, the French Republic is a haven for all friends of freedom. Tyranny banished you. Free France once again opens its doors to you. In Paris, Marx directs his energy to step up the activity of the Communist League. Upon learning about the beginning of the revolution in Germany, Marx and Engels go to Cologne to participate in it directly. Here they begin to publish the Neue Rheinische Zeitung. The editorial staff: Karl Marx, editor-in-chief. Friedrich Engels, Marx's closest associate in the editorial staff. Wilhelm Wolff, secretary of the editorial staff. Poets Georg Weert and Ferdinand Freilgrat. Publicist Heinrich Bürgers and Ernst Dronke. Engels. That was the time of revolution, and to work in the daily press at that time was sheer pleasure. You can see the action of each word. You can see which articles virtually strike like grenades and which explode like shells. The newspaper explained the tasks of the proletariat in the revolution, guided the work of the Communist League members, and supported the national liberation movement of the Czechs, Hungarians, Poles, and Italians. According to Lenin, the Neue Rheinische Zeitung was the best, unsurpassed organ of the revolutionary proletariat. Engels viewed it as the only newspaper which, in the democratic movement of that time, presented the point of view of the proletariat. This was reflected in its all-out solidarity with the Paris insurrectionists in June of 1848. The blood-stained suppression of the June uprising aroused profound indignation among progressives all over the world. For such minutes, one can hate for decades and revenge for a lifetime, said Herzen, who witnessed the June events in Paris. The revolution in Europe suffered a defeat. On May 19, 1849, the last issue of Neue Rheinische Zeitung, printed in red ink, came out with an appeal to the Cologne workers. The editors of Neue Rheinische Zeitung, saying farewell to you, thank you for your participation. Their last word has always been and will always be everywhere: liberation of the working class. The years of reaction set in. Marx and Engels were compelled to leave Germany forever. Marx arrived in London.
Здесь он приступает к глубокому
Here he
анализу
began to profoundly analyze the lessons of the revolution, so as to take them into account in the future struggle. A revolutionary in science, Marx also approached the revolution as a science and did not tolerate adventurism and utopism. The Workers' Party must not be guided by subjective desires, but must proceed from objective conditions. Such was his stand. September 15th, 1850, a session of the Central Committee of the Communist League. Certain members of the Central Committee considered to carry out an immediate revolutionary strike, and the power would be in the hands of the workers. In the heated dispute, Marx convinces them. We say to the workers, you have got to go through 15, 20, 50 years of civil wars and national wars, not merely to change your conditions, but in order to change yourselves and become qualified for political power. Marx resumes his intensive theoretical studies, spending whole days in the reading room of the British Museum, developing the revolutionary theory still further. He foresees that a new upsurge of the revolutionary movement is possible only after another economic crisis. The First World Economic Crisis began in 1857, activating the workers' movement. The First first mass organization of the revolutionary proletariat, the International Working Men's Association, the First International,